for the Honourable Member for Aberdeen South, who has so comprehensively put the case today at the start of this debate, and I congratulate him and other members and the Backbench Business Committee for allowing this debate, which is clearly capturing the attention of many people, because it's very heavily subscribed, as you have already observed, Madam Deputy Speaker. As the Honourable Member said, this is about real people, real lives, not names on a spreadsheet, and that's what we should remain focused on. I have serious concern about the introduction of this loan charges having on my constituents. While my constituents' cases are small in number, they are huge in impact. I'm the first to say that people should be paying their taxes and that tax avoidance is wrong and should be stopped. And I'm grateful that HMRC and the Treasury are taking steps to address tax avoidance. I'll give way to a maximum of 2 members.
I thank the honourable gentleman very much for giving way, and I very much agree with him. I think the biggest problem with this is the retrospective nature of it, because tax situations and the way we pay tax over the years has changed so much, and the attitude towards tax. So many people entered into these loan arrangements in good faith, and of course brought on by their employers, not the employee. And so I think the point made by one of my honourable friends behind me is that I think a tax judge needs to actually look at this now, because I think it's a retrospective nature that is so wrong to bring back, asking people to repay massive amounts of money in retrospectively.
Yeah. Makes the point very clearly. It's the retrospective element which is particularly disturbing. And in the case of the loan charge, I'm concerned that a small number of ordinary working people who are not millionaires with broad shoulders, but those on average incomes who've acted in good faith are being hit by significant tax penalties implemented in the most unfair manner. I'll make a bit of progress. I've seen the HMRC's briefing pack on the loan charge, and note where it says in bold, HMRC has never approved tax avoidance schemes. I'm glad to hear that, Madam Deputy Speaker, but I'm not sure in this case if I completely believe it, because this law, when it was passed in 2017, applied a retrospective tax going back all the way to 1999. And notwithstanding the trouble of retrospective law in general, 18 years is a very long time to disapprove of something and not say you don't approve it and not act to fix it. And the reality is that by HMRC not speaking out and by not acting to prevent these loan schemes being used for 18 years, while they maybe did not give explicit approval, they certainly gave implicit acceptance. I give way to my honourable friend.
Grateful to my honourable friend, and he's making a very powerful point that, put it at its best, HMRC were woefully slow on this. But would he agree with me that even at that late stage, the Treasury could have sorted this out when they accepted the amendment from the Right Honourable Gentleman for Kingston and Surbiton in February to undertake a proper review and get the matter sorted out so it doesn't have the impact on individuals that he and the Honourable Gentleman have talked about? And isn't it woeful, the fact that HMRC and the Treasury didn't conduct a thorough review, and that's why we now need a proper investigation, and one that's independent?
I tend to agree with my honourable friend, but fortunately we've got the Minister, who's a good Minister, and I echo the comments made earlier about the Minister, and I'm sure he will respond in a positive way to this debate at the end, and we can look with anticipation for positive moves to reassure the situation and take steps at this time. To some people, such as tax accountants, employers and even people like my constituents who were employed under these schemes and were told they couldn't be employed otherwise, it's easy to see why they thought it was okay to use these schemes, even more so because they believed they were perfectly legal. Lee Ashcroft, who is one of my constituents impacted by the loan charge, is an engineer in the construction industry, a normal working man who happened to find himself, through no fault of his own, in a sector where businesses contracting workers were obliging them to enter into these schemes if they wanted to work. To Mr Ashcroft, these schemes seemed unfair because there was no holiday pay and no sick pay. That's unfair, but they seem perfectly legal. He was told they were perfectly legal by the company he worked for, and he checked that out with advisors and was told it was perfectly legal. And Mr Ashcroft needed to work and accepted that this was the deal on which he worked. Mr Ashcroft tells me, in relation to £6,500 in loan payments, HMRC expecting him to agree to settle a bill of £25,500, money he clearly does not have. He strongly disputes the amount he has to pay, vastly in excess of what he earned, but the clock is ticking. If he doesn't enter into an arrangement to pay by the upcoming deadline, he will be expected to pay the full amount with fines added on top. He's being forced to make an impossible decision: accept paying a huge bill he thinks has been miscalculated, as well as being morally wrong, or try and get HMRC to re-evaluate what he owes, which, if unsuccessful, he will have to pay the full amount with fines on top. Either way, this will have a life-changing impact on his future prosperity. Indeed, the amount of worry that I see from him, it's already having a life-changing impact, and people will have had stories of other constituents whose lives have been turned upside down by this. It's unclear to me why HMRC are going after Mr Ashcroft in the first place. After all, it was his employer who forced people into these schemes. It's the employer who benefited financially from this, yet it is the employees who are being left to pick up the tab to HMRC, who have waited 18 years to collect it and want it now, all in one dollop. These advance payment notices are being relentlessly pursued by HMRC with no independent right of appeal, and I think that just does not seem to be playing fair.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. I think he's raised a really important point. One of the most iniquitous aspects of this case for me is the fact that the promoters of these schemes are not being pursued, and I wonder if he knows of any that have been prosecuted to date.
Well, I don't know the detail, but I think the Minister will be able to update us on that when he responds from the dispatch box, and I do think that is being looked at by the system as well. But nonetheless, the reality is that people were pretty much forced, if they wanted work, to go into these schemes, which they believed, having checked out, were perfectly reasonable and legal. And then, many years later, they're picking up a big tab which doesn't seem to equate to the money they got at the time. It seems very much bigger. And I'm going to complete and finish now, because other members need to speak. So I just want to talk about one of my other constituents, Jonathan Davidson, who told me the loan charge continues to be a very real worry for myself and my family. HMRC have only now, and this is like a couple of weeks ago, only now advised me of the actual settlement figures, which are much higher than my expectations. As such, I am being forced out of retirement, even though my health is not great, and I am now actively looking for employment. And that's an example of what's happening to real lives and real people. For all my constituents affected, this issue is causing severe emotional and financial distress, something which I think HMRC are neglecting, are not taking note of, are behaving as though they don't understand that it's about real people's lives. But this is serious, and it shouldn't be minimised. This is causing a devastating impact on people's lives. The distress is very, very, very real. And HMRC's actions are also self-defeating, as this will undoubtedly cause ordinary working people, push them into bankruptcy, restricting HMRC's ability to recover tax liabilities, which doesn't seem very sensible, and that will create other pressures on the public purse in other areas. So we need some common sense here, Minister, and I see you as the personification of common sense. It's time, Madam Deputy Speaker, for the government to pause this loan charge, to think again about the best way forward, which should be fair to the Exchequer, but also fair to honest working people who believe they were doing the right thing, and who have been, unfortunately, and for many, unavoidably, caught up in these schemes. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Well done. David Davis.
It's a pleasure to follow the